In today's complex environment, almost every major project, from mining to transmission lines, is contentious. Hi, my name is Allie Meeres.
And I'm Byng Giraud.
Welcome to Primary Risk, where each month we speak with the people behind the projects shaping our world.
We'll be hosting candid conversations and hearing from industry leaders, political figures, engineers, and project proponents. We'll be exploring the soft issue risks, challenges, and solutions, and behind-the-scenes stories of what it took to get these complex projects across the finish line. Or not.
Hello. Welcome back, Byng.
Good to be back.
Are we still
We
allowed
haven't left
to
the office.
I know, this is our first time back recording a podcast since 2024.
Okay.
So we were meant to do an episode with Jason Kenny last month, but we do have one coming up with another guest in a few weeks, so stay tuned for that.
Jason will be on. I spoke to him on Monday, and he was sorry he had to miss it, but he's keen to sit in front of our microphones and listen to our blather. So.
Awesome. Well, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently in 2025. Our team here at Sedgwick has convinced us to be doing 2 podcast episodes a month now. So you're going to hear Byng and I rant for 1 episode a month, and then we will bring on a distinguished guest for another, someone who has built major projects and who is the face.
Do they have to be distinguished?
We're probably going to have some non-distinguished people on because they're in our circles. But we will be doing 2 episodes, and this is the first one that we are recording as the Byng and Allie episode. And today is going to be an interesting episode. We are going to be talking about the top 10 list that Premier Eby put out. We're going to talk about the list and what we like about it. We're going to maybe throw some criticisms at it. We're going to talk about the list that Sedgwick put out, because we did put our own top 10 list out.
Before they put out theirs.
Before they put out theirs. And we put it out once it was rumored. And then we are also going to spend some time talking about maybe non-project items that would be on our list, but perhaps initiatives that we believe the government and private sector should take.
Some a little more out there ideas. I mean, so everybody's trying to come up with how is the best to respond to the Trump tariffs. And to the credit of Canadian governments across the board, across political spectrum, they're trying to come up with solutions. They're spending a lot of time on this. They're working hard, but I don't know, I just feel like the innovation is lacking.
The creativity is low.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the list that Premier Eby put out. So in response to Donald Trump, BC, like most provinces, been hiking up their socks and trying to put their best foot forward. So this list includes 10/18 projects. Byng, what do you like about this list that Premier Eby put out?
Well, what I do like about it is this is a list that recognizes what we're strong in British Columbia and in Canada. So what are we strong in? We're strong in natural resources, and this is what we've been sort of pounding the table here at this podcast, and many other people have been pounding the table. This is what we're good at. So I don't know why it takes a Trump to let us to recognize that these are the things we're good at. But I like the list because he talks about critical minerals, our mining and mineral exploration sectors. He talks about clean energy and green energy generally, which is great, and energy security.
Guys, we have a new word for oil and gas.
It's energy and security. It doesn't say oil and gas.
Someone call Texas
energy.
and Alberta and let them know they don't have an oil and gas industry.
The minister in Saudi Arabia is no longer the minister of oil. He's now the minister of energy security. Okay, so I understand you can't actually say oil and gas, but whatever. I'll be forgiving. So critical minerals, energy security, green energy. These are great things for us to do because these are things we're good at in British Columbia, and we've got lots of projects. So I'm at a high level, I'm very happy with the list.
Okay, now why don't we go through a couple things from the list? So why don't we start with critical minerals? We've got Eskay Creek, Highland Valley Copper, Red Chris, and Mount Milligan. Byng, I think one of the things that I'm kind of worried about is, weren't most of these projects sort of already approved?
Yeah, Eskay is a brownfield that is well advanced. There's a great team there. They've got a great relationship with the Tahltan Nation, so this is a really positive project. Highland Valley Copper's been around for a very long time. I jokingly say it's been a mine with a 10-year mine life for 50 years. So it keeps reinventing itself. There's always new deposits discovered. So this is an expansion of an existing operating mine. So again, it's not new, it's an expansion. Mm-hmm. Red Chris is up and running. It's owned by Newmont and Imperial Metals. Probably one of the most exciting copper deposits in Canada, if not the world. And has lots of room for expansion. But again, this is a mine that essentially has gone through its environmental assessment, needs lots of permits and needs to expand, but something that's well underway. And as well, have a really good relationship with the Tahltan First Nation.
Which is important. And I think what we'd like to see, and we'll move on to our list shortly, but one thing we think is maybe missing from this critical minerals list, there's a huge focus here on copper, obviously SK's gold, silver, but we're sort of missing the other opportunities, for example, nickel.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things about this list. It's primarily copper. Copper. Mount Milligan's also in here, and again, that's expansion. These are all either operating or brownfield or expansion. So there's nothing really new here. Exciting projects, lots of jobs. By all means, accelerate them. But none of this wasn't already underway. So it's not really a new, innovative. Let's do something new to deal with the Trump tariffs. There's not a lot of other things here. We have graphite in British Columbia. We have zinc. We have germanium. We have some of the more obscure critical minerals. Nickel. We have got some great nickel deposits. FPX, the Baptiste deposit, is an exciting project. I would have liked to see more of those on this list. And again, it's the difference between brownfields or existing projects that need expansion versus some of the newer projects that could really add to the economy. Not that these projects don't add to the economy, but they're going to add a few hundred jobs or maybe a few dozen jobs to a place where those jobs already exist. What about something new in a place that needs it, in a part of the province that needs it, that creates 200-300 jobs like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, again, we're very thankful for the list. I think what's so nice about it is just to see the BC government turn its attention to moving projects forward, and an admission to such that it is tough to get projects built in BC. So they had to sort of come up with a list to say, we're going to expedite these projects.
Why do you even, if you were in an efficient, functioning regulatory system, you probably wouldn't need a list of things you need to accelerate, because the speed at which they move would be acceptable to all parties. Adequate environmental assessment, adequate Indigenous participation and consultation, but timely decision-making. So this speaks to a larger problem. It's an admission at some level that there is a problem and that you need heavy-handed political intervention in the face of, geopolitical uncertainties before you can accelerate a project. That's probably not the best way to develop a major project policy for a country.
Yeah, and I mean, this list was sort of touted as being, I believe it was $20 billion more into the BC economy, but when we think about getting creative, as you said, I mean, you look at the clean energy projects, there's 10 projects listed. Those were all announced earlier this year.
Yeah, the Premier announced them, again, awesome. Last fall, excellent projects. Almost all have Indigenous ownership. Most of them have majority Indigenous ownership. This shows that industry and First Nations can work together to accelerate things and to solve climate change issues. It's a great list. But again, it was announced last fall. And it was already announced that they were going to take these out of the environmental assessment process. We talked about this on our previous podcast. Mm-hmm. Well, isn't this an admission that your process is cumbersome by having to remove projects from that system? But again, let's be positive. Mm-hmm. These are great projects. They're the way things should move forward, and I'm excited about them. And BC does need more energy. And if these projects all go ahead, that's a lot more green renewables for the province. So yeah, I'm excited about it, but it is kind of an admission that you have to take them out of the environmental assessment process to actually get them done on time. Even green energy projects need special attention to be successfully and timely permitted. Mm-hmm. That's a bit of a red flag.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Well, speaking of red flags, I'm not sure that our list made the Premier EVs list. I'm not sure there's one project that we put on our list that made the top 10 list.
Because we weren't thinking about anything that was already underway.
I think it's because we combed through all the media releases and project announcements and things that we knew were already happening. For example, we believe Enbridge T North is going to be putting shovels in the ground pretty soon.
Energy security list here, those things are... Cedar LNG is already well underway. Yeah. Great. Help it with whatever other permitting it needs. T North, apparently there are going to be shovels in the ground in the next couple of months. So it's not a new thing. Again, there's not much new on this list. The NEBC connector, I understand there's some issues there with Indigenous consultation, the Blueberry court case, cumulative effects. I don't know where that one is. So maybe that is a new one on the list. Mm-hmm. Although the project did receive its approval, its environmental approvals back in December of 2023. So it's been stalled. So maybe some attention to get it unstalled is worthwhile and good to hear about. The actual only new thing on this list, although the Premier did talk about it last month in Prince George, is the North Coast transmission line. Great idea. Another large 500 megawatt major line across the north, help us develop our natural resource and our communities in the north, in the northwest, the northeast, the north center. great idea, but this project is in its infancy, and even with a really aggressive environmental assessment approach, even with the energy regulator now being in charge and expediting the process, this is still going to take years. This is not a project that is a response to an impending threat, like the tariffs are now, like today, right? I mean, that's real.
Kind of a public sector project.
Yeah, that's part of the issue as well. On our list, we tried to stay away from spending any public money. So this is BC Hydro, which is a Crown corporation. I guess you could argue whether that's public money or not. It's their money, but it's not the private sector.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe let's pivot to our list because it's entirely private sector, and I think
we like our list better.
I think the other thing we focused on beyond just being private sector was exporting our goods other places, right? We really focused on how can we get our product exported to other countries, and what can we do maybe, with the threat of tariffs that are now impending for the beginning of March, how can we really diversify our economy in a way that we have had other countries asking for it?
Rapidly taking advantage of what we know people want and what we're good at, and trying to be creative and trying not to spend government money, because let's be clear, with all respect to the feds and the province, we spent a lot of money pre-COVID. I mean, the Fed spent $80 billion. I'm not really sure what it was for. And then we had COVID, so we had to spend a ton more money. And I don't think we've got a lot more money to prime the pumps. There's 3 ways to prime the pumps, as they say. One is to cut taxes. Well, cutting taxes means less revenue, and so I don't think governments are interested in that because they don't have any money. The second way is to prime the pump is to inject money, so the government spends money. Well, we don't have any money. I just said that. So 1 and 2 are out of the question. The third way, the way to prime the pump, is to decrease regulation and increase the speed of projects so private sector money can be the economic generator. That's the cheapest thing to do, but for some reason it's always the hardest. Mm-hmm. So our list is a little more on the third level.
We're focusing on the deregulation, which I don't know. It's sort of similar to oil and gas. I'm not really sure we're allowed to use the words deregulation. So instead we'll use the
energy. It's not oil and gas.
Energy security. And not deregulation. It's expediting projects.
Well, because deregulation in Canada seems to be some sort of bad word. The idea of making something more efficient, more timely, doesn't necessarily mean it's less rigorous, right?
Just more focused work. It's, we'll touch on this later, but a lot of it is just focusing people's attention on one thing instead of having people spread over multiple projects. It means putting timelines to things. It means, in some ways having to push up certain consultations.
What we talk about in our list, and I'm jumping ahead here, is about the existing mines in British Columbia, about 17 operating mines, about those mines and their expansions. Well, and some of those are on the Premier's list. Well, the release of that is not, it shouldn't cost the government very much money, other than the time and resources of its staff. Well, we have an entire ministry of mines. And I know they're all busy, and I'm sure they're all good people, but shouldn't they be focusing on those 17 mines as opposed to some of these broader policy initiatives? Like, if it's an immediate challenge, let's take people away from some of these broader policy initiatives that are longer term and focus them on immediately helping new mines open and mines expand. Maybe take 5 or 6 civil servants who are focused on broad issues and maybe dealing with the same issue on over like 10 or 11 or 50 different files, and say, you know what, you people, your team, you're going to only work on this one project. Mm-hmm. And your job is to get this thing through its permits in the next few months. So you're people being divided in ministries, not by policy area, but by project results. And we know that's kind of an interesting approach.
Well, we know this works too, because, as a consultant company, we're often hired for very specific issues for clients. And we come in and we bring people and we bring time and I think sometimes intelligence, and we help to solve problems at a very, very specific level and issue. And I think when you start to apply that model in government, you might actually see faster results when, like you said, you're not spreading people thin. So with that.
Yeah. So if I've decided I want to, this mine, let's take their list. We want Red Chris copper to get its expansion, get to its block caving in a timely manner. Maybe I should assign a team specifically to Red Chris, to solving their problems, with a mandate to solve their problems. We've done this before for other things. I mean, when BC got the Olympics, it was the decision of government and the private sector to say, we're going to win the Olympics and we're going to run the Olympics. Well, that was an objective set and an objective achieved. People had to be dedicated to that project. When we do major infrastructure in this province, like a SkyTrain or something like for those that SkyTrain's our version of a metro or a subway, we don't have it off the side of the desk and somebody in the Ministry of Transportation. We set up a team to build and construct that specific project. That we don't. It's not just, I'm working on 10 different transit projects and a little bit of my project is on this multi-billion-dollar transit line. No, I've got a team that just does that. And maybe that needs to be the way we approach some of these larger projects if they're so-called important.
So perhaps our recommendation is to first put a team on number 1 on our list, which is immediately fast-tracking phase 2 of LNG Canada. So Byng, why did this come number 1?
Biggest private sector investment in Canadian history. Biggest private sector investment in Canadian history. I say that twice because that's a big deal. For us to get a multinational to spend billions in our economy was a big win. Most other projects that are of comparable size to that have been in Canada have been public sector. So the injection that made to the BC economy is something that we can't. That's what we should be trying to replicate. So they have a phase 2. So if that was the biggest private sector investment in our history, why don't we try and get another one? Because it's there already.
And I think the reason perhaps it didn't make the list, and this was kind of our sub-bullet on this, was this includes waiving its green energy requirements until the power line is available. So, I think we all sort of see the writing on the wall as to why phase 2 has been maybe stalled or maybe isn't moving as quickly or didn't make the list is because the government has said this needs to be, quote unquote, electrified.
Yeah, it wasn't this government, so it was the predecessor. So I want to spread the blame here. The previous government under the BC Liberals came up with a policy that all energy produced in British Columbia had to be from renewable sources. Now, that's easy to say because we've got these huge hydroelectric dams that were built back in the 60s and 70s to produce most of our electricity. And then you try and supplement that with wind and what have you. But we have greater need now, and we can't keep up. And building, with all respect, all these new green, these windmills or these solar farms are not going to keep up. So we've got potentially the second largest private sector investment in Canada, sitting with LNG Canada Phase 2. Sitting right there, what's impeding it? It doesn't have electricity because it has to be run on electricity. There is no power line. There's no way to plug it in. So you can't build it, right? There's no infrastructure. So then the government solution is, well, let's build this mega power line. Well, that power line, even with an accelerated regulatory process, is years. So now you've basically taken your immediate reaction to Trump tariffs and put it into whoever's president next, right? It's got nothing to do with today. So how about we, creative idea, probably offends lots of people, but why don't we allow ourselves to burn our own gas? We have lots of it. We export it for other people to burn, and it is the same atmosphere last time I checked. Why don't we burn some of it here while we're waiting for the power line to get there? It could be a transitional thing. We're going to only allow you, LNG Canada, for 5 years to run this thing on combined cycle gas plants through your pipeline, and you've got to do your best, and you've got to work hard with us and BC Hydro to build the power line so we can switch off this as quickly as possible. That would be a sudden move, right? That would be something like, let's do it now.
And it's a bold move, but I mean, aren't we in a time where we need bold thinking and bold moves? And I think, our second item on our list was fast tracking the Silicim's LNG project's environmental assessment. And similar to LNG Canada, I mean, this means that you are admitting to the fact that the environmental assessment, even for a First Nations owned LNG project, takes a really long time. And hey, can't we speed those things up so that we can start exporting some of our oil, some of our gas to Asia because they want it.
Exporting some of our energy security.
And, starting to shift back that huge reliance on the US for, our GDP.
Well, I mean, what's the whole point here? We're trying to diversify our economy. We're trying to, and when I say diversify our economy, I don't mean more product. We're trying to diversify our customer base. We are too dependent on the Americans. That dependency not only has it made us vulnerable to the situation today, it's one of the reasons we have low productivity in this country because we live off this 30% discount on our dollar. We've got to get over, taking the easy way out here. If we want to be innovative, we need to remember that Japan and Greece and Germany, amongst others, came to this country and said, we would like to buy your natural gas, and we told them no.
See ya.
Like, what's that all about? So here we've got two projects. One, based on an already successful investment with Shell and its partners. Two, an Indigenous-led LNG project, 12 million tons per annum, very large project. Those two things, if you could accelerate them, those alone would move the GDP of this province. Those two projects alone. And what's holding them up? Environmental assessment, which we now hear could be accelerated under the right circumstances. It's being done for others, so why not consider it? And they don't have electricity. Well, there is a solution to that. If you're willing to be creative and maybe willing to take some political lumps for people who want to tear their hair out and say that, we're going to put some greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. Hey, that's a real thing, but Canada is not a big contributor. And the reality is we're exporting the gas anyway, and it's being burnt anyway. All we're doing right now is selling it to the Americans at a discount price so they can put it in their LNG plants in Louisiana and sell it. The lack of understanding of supply chain just, I'm incredulous. But anyway, there's here's something you could consider. Like anybody who wants to consider being something bold, this is a bold solution. And it would help would be the first Indigenous-led LNG facility in the world.
Yeah, more than Cedar, because Cedar's 50-50. So this would be an Indigenous owned. What a feather to put in your cap too, right? When it comes to that, it would be incredible to see Nisga'a and to see Silesums move forward. And like you said, the ability to turn the dial on our GDP right now is so needed. So, okay, well, number 3, sort of similar and sort of what you just spoke to, but so removing restrictions on natural gas produced electricity in BC to allow overproduction of energy at low prices.
And I got some personal beefs with this because, we flooded a lot of valleys for dams. And listen, I understand why we did it. It was important, and I generally support those things. But the reality is we probably could have taken a way smaller footprint of the earth and built a combined cycle gas plant as opposed to having to build Site C and the dam. We wouldn't have had to flood the valley. So it was an environmental trade-off. You can't say that one was really, that much more greener than the other. So we have lots of gas. We know how to build these plants. They're really efficient. Why can't we just do that in the meantime? And maybe it's a transition strategy. But again, we are in a desperate situation right now. So everybody tells us. If we're in a desperate situation, that requires innovative thinking.
And compromise.
Compromise.
So I think if you're talking about these big facilities and you're talking about natural gas, you're saying, okay, we're in a desperate situation. Things are different now, politically, geopolitically, for our economy. We're going to move a little bit differently for the next 5 to 10 years.
Let's get through this, and then we can reconsider.
And maybe we're even building the transmission lines while these facilities are operating.
You might have some money to build them with.
And the Ontario government has done this, right? The Ontario government, especially with Northern Mines, has said, how about you guys sign agreements for maybe 5 or 10 years and import LNG or import, CNG. And then in 5-10 years, we'll build a transmission line will be ready for you and you can be electric. So it's just, making it work.
Something has to go first, right? You can't say, we can't build a facility until we have electricity. Well, I'm not going to build electricity until I have a customer. Well, that's not going to help you build an economy.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll jump over number 4 because we talked about this already, but we just really think that reviewing the top 10 most viable mining projects in the province, based on...
Assign teams, get them going.
Assign teams, get them going. So that's number 4. Now, number 5 is interesting and definitely something that didn't make the list, which I think we were kind of sad about because we think it's really one of the simplest ways to inject BC's economy with jobs.
Low impact too. Yeah.
And financially, is approving all existing mineral exploration notice of work permits within 90 days. So why is this so important? Well, if you take a snapshot of mineral exploration projects in BC, even say 4 or 5 of them, that's like almost $100 million, right? I mean, say on average that notice of work permit was for, say, 30 jobs and maybe $5 million. Those add up very quickly. And right now, there's a lot of issues with the time it takes to get notice of work permits. So again, if you assigned a team and said, here's the deadline, we need to work through these. Obviously, there's First Nations consultation. There's other issues that need to happen. But if we're able to get through that, that's actually a really big injection into the BC economy, knowing that 9 out of 10 mines in the province right now that are operating are discovered by these mineral explorers.
Yeah, and it's like... In the economic development world, it's called smokestack chasing. The idea that you miss all the little opportunities. So you're a small town. You miss all the little opportunities of the yoga studio and the cobbler and all these small businesses because you're chasing a factory because that'll bring us 300 jobs. Well, 10 small businesses might bring you 300 jobs too. That's what's often missing in these things is people always have to go after the big honking project. Well, we have too originally, but yes, you get enough small things going and you get some success. So we have lots of great geology. We have interesting geography. We have essentially a cluster here in Vancouver and in British Columbia of mineral expertise. We have some of the best mining schools in the world at UBC. We have all the things you need. You can't, as they say, you can't swing a dead cat downtown Vancouver without hitting a geologist.
Do they
What?
say that?
Well, I do. I'm old. Not maybe your generation.
I'm not swinging dead cats downtown.
You can't say you can't swing a dead cat without hitting somebody in the mining industry in BC. Why not unleash these things? There are permits that have been sitting around for a couple of years. Again, they're low impact. This is not nobody's building a mine. They're just finding out that something's there so they can encourage investment and have somebody to have a deeper look. The federal government, the provincial government have critical mineral strategies. We've been approached by the Europeans. We've been approached by our friends in Japan. They're interested in our critical minerals. We have mines, sure, we can expand their production, but what about the new mines? And the new mines start here.
And it takes, quite a long time to get through finding a mineral deposit, marketing it, doing feasibility studies. The amount of time and resources it takes to actually bring a discovery all the way through operation is long. And our mines do have mine lives, right? So we do need to get, again,
They do end.
it kind of speaks to like how in our province, and we spoke about this in our last podcast, but we had Site C and we had LNG Canada and we had TMX and those are gone now. Well, the same thing's going to happen in our mining industry. So it's super important that we're supporting mineral exploration and we're letting people explore so that we can begin to look at what our future mines are.
And it's all private sector money at risk.
Yes.
Right? It's people investing and taking a risk, buying shares in small companies that they think that they might be profitable. So the cost to the taxpayer is very little, other than some administrative environmental oversights. Most of these exploration companies are entering agreements with First Nations. Those that don't, tough, right? The smart ones are. It's an easy thing to do. So just accelerate your permits and you could get maybe not billions, but hundreds of millions of dollars of economic activity without a lot of cost to the purse and not a lot of environmental impact.
Yeah, and you could get it for this summer, right? That's the beautiful
now.
thing. I mean,
Put some, put some people to work now.
It's not snowing all over southern BC, that's for sure. Okay, number 6 was meeting with the leadership of 17 operating mines. We talked about that already. So I think what was interesting about this, though, Byng, is that you basically said, why don't we meet the operation of the 17 operating mines, see what their expansion plans are, and also see, who has strong, solid First Nations partnerships and, working together with First Nations to ensure that the mines that you're tapping are ones that they're working progressively.
Is where I'm sort of confused about how time is prioritized and what the priorities are by some of our decision makers. You only have 17 operating mines in this province. If I was in charge, I would convene a meeting with the 17 mines. They all have expansion plans. Okay, you 17 men and women, how are your agreements with First Nations? Are they in favor of your expansion? Check that box. Or do you have the money you need to do this expansion? What permits stand in your way? Let's build you all a little action plan and we'll get all your expansions. Again, very little cost to the taxpayer, if any. Low impact, and done in a consultative way that includes the title holders as Indigenous people. Government sees what's going on, and all these mines already have their plans. So I don't really understand. I mean, I liked the 4 on the Premier's list, but why wasn't it all 17? They're all doing it.
We actually think his list should have been 50.
Well, it's one item, 17 times, right? Yeah. Just depends how you spin it, right?
Sure. Okay. And we play with the numbers. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a pretty straightforward thing to do. And like you said, we sort of went after speed, private sector investment, and diversification. And again, with mining, a lot of our mines, yes, obviously coal is our number 1 export here in British Columbia by weight, by volume. And
they all have expansion plans, most of them.
They all have expansion plans. And by the way, like our diversified trading partners out of the US for a lot of our minerals are, Japan, Korea, India, China.
But just to sort of beat this to death is, if I put the 17 mines in a room with the minister and deputy and somebody from the Premier's office or whoever, and I said, come and bring your Indigenous partner, you would separate the adults from the children pretty fast, right? So have you got what's your relationship with the guy sitting next to you? It's pretty good. Okay, you agree? Yeah, it's good. So how fast could you get up and running if we accelerated your permits? I could probably have an expansion in 6 months. And how many people are going to employ? I want to employ 50 more people. Mm-hmm. Throw some effort at it. I make it sound really simple, but when was the last time the government sat those? There's only 17.
I think the point, though, that we try to draw from our list is these are simple.
I'm really trying to stay away from
these are not complicated. Yeah, exactly. Well, I think number 7 was pretty interesting, and this is a complete Byng idea. Take 0 credit for this one. So work with the ports of Prince Rupert and Vancouver to analyze the level of U.S. traffic currently using these ports. Can you speak to this idea? I mean,
Okay, most of my stuff is like, let's do something positive. But, Canadians are grumpy about what's being done to us. And, and I'm not sure counter tariffs are really the solution because, our economy is smaller than the economy of California. The Americans, basically, as you said, they consume 80% of what they produce.
Yeah.
They can kind of ignore us no matter how much we may throw. Like individual parts of British or of the United States will be impacted, Kentucky by our bourbon ban.
but the
or whatever.
reality is, us putting tariffs on the U.S. is so negligible, and they're not
It's
really
really
going to
David and
impact
Goliath,
them.
and Goliath, is our sling broken, right? Our trade corridors, our rail corridors from Prince Rupert and from Vancouver, and I'm not as familiar with the East Coast, with Montreal and that, but essentially these rail lines run all the way. They're kind of direct and fast. That's why we're used down to Chicago and south of that. So a lot of what's being exported from the United States and imported to the United States is coming down those lines. Maybe you should put on a container fee for anything that crosses the border. Maybe we shouldn't allow American coal to be exported out of our terminal. This would cost our terminals money. So this is a bit crazy. But the Americans, like Long Beach, their ports in California, don't allow coal exports. That's why the Americans have to export it through us. Anyway, that would be, let's, instead of tariffs, like just put on a container fee or a rail car fee or something. I don't know how that'd work. This is just, again, the great thing about trying to be innovative and come up with creative solutions to an impending problem is you need to consider everything. I tell my kids, and this is, stop telling me, since they were small, stop telling me what you can't do. Tell me what you can do. And so people should be willing, our leaders should be willing to sit down and say, what are all the crazy ideas? And stop saying no out of hand. Mm-hmm. What are all the potential things we could do to really diversify our economy and really turn ourselves around, meet the demands of our other partners and, again, live well despite what the Americans do to us? Well, that requires us to be willing to consider all ideas. So many of the ideas today, there's probably a lot of reasons not to do them, but at least they need to be considered. This idea that we're tossing things away out of hand because, somebody might wring their hands, that's not vigorous, innovative, nation-building thinking.
Mm-hmm. There's always a reason not to do something, right? It's if you've worked on any
toddlers
major project,
learn the word no before they learn yes.
Yeah, and we don't like the word no here at Sedgwick, but I think that's part of it is the resource sector in particular. Be it ports, be it natural gas or mines, filled with people that have a lot of creativity. Why do they have so much creativity? Well, they're not easy sectors to work in, and oftentimes you are having to be creative. So really, I think there needs to be a bit more engagement as well, just with the resource sector on what ideas they have and how maybe those ideas can be integrated.
And big ideas that deal with the here and now.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of what, in defense of government, a lot of what they're hearing from industry groups and individual companies, lobby groups, is their particular problem and often trying to solve a problem that they had for a long time and dressing it up as, this is a solution to Trump tariffs. Well, no. That's, solving the top 10 list of X association maybe benefits that industry, but is it really an immediate solution to an immediate problem, right? So the private sector has to think a little bit bigger here too and stop being a little bit parochial. Again, why call the 17 mines together? So you stop each one of them from playing off one another.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Number 8, can you talk me through this tax credit idea?
Okay, so this one is an impact on the public purse, but in a negative sense. It would possibly mean less revenue because it's tax credits. I thought about this just because one of our great, and we're not the only ones guilty of this, Canadians. One of the great failures of industrial policy in the past, let's say 24 months, has been battery plants, right?
Battery plants. We do not like battery plants here.
Europeans,
Sorry.
the Canadians, we have sunk so much money into this as sort of the Western. And of course, all it takes is the Chinese just to do a little cheaper and they just blow the doors off us. So we're grabbing the wrong end of the supply chain. If we're going to incentivize the supply chain, we should be grabbing the end of the supply chain where we are in control and have dominance. So you can't move a copper deposit. You can't move a lithium deposit. You can't move a tree, and you can't move an oil deposit until you take advantage of it, exploit it, and that's to sell the product. So we should be incentivizing the things we know can't pick up and move, like solar panels, which is what happened in the solar panel industry, pick up and move to China at a moment's notice when they can do it cheaper. We've got to start investing in the right end of the supply chain. If public policy wants to do tax credits and these kinds of things, it needs to grab the part of the supply chain that's going to create immediate jobs in our country that can't be moved. Mm-hmm. And so, sorry, battery plants, you're not it.
Solar panels 2.0. That is what battery plants are. And listen, I think we've seen a few companies pop up that have been successful, but China is better at using our products, our raw materials to build these things. They're faster, they're more efficient. Their ability to set up factories, to, simply graduate engineers.
But it's only in certain things. There are some things we're better at. So let's do what we're good at.
Yeah. And I just think that, with some of these tax credits, and again, government will probably be grilled for some of these things, but if you really want the economy to diversify and our GDP to grow and to claw back into, diversification of exports, these tax credits would help.
This money stays in the country, and because these are mostly rural parts, it stays in parts of the country that need that incentive. This just popped into my head. So a lot of money was thrown by the federal government into that Volkswagen plant. And I don't know all the details of it.
Das Auto.
I don't know all the details about it. But that may have just been a massive mistake, given that the auto industry with the auto pact is suddenly in the crosshairs of Donald Trump. That may have been a massive mistake to spend that kind of Canadian dollar on promoting this car plant when the whole auto industry is under threat, broadly speaking, because of the Trump tariffs. Again, was that the right decision? Was that good planning? I mean, maybe at the time it seemed like a good idea, but it's one of those things. Again, it's portable. Volkswagen or whomever else can pull out and take that money elsewhere if it gets too hot and heavy for them.
I feel like most prime ministers have saved the auto industry over the last couple decades. I mean,
it's lots of jobs. You can't walk away from it. It's important, but it's highly dependent on the Americans.
Yeah.
That's not something we're not going to start exporting Toyotas to Indonesia or to Greece, right? They don't need that. That's not what they want. That's a North American thing. So that has to be solved. That has to be solved here. And luckily I don't have a lot of opinion on that because I don't know anything about it. So
we're not auto people. We'll just brush over that one.
Drive one.
Brush over that one. So number 9 and number 10. Our number 9 is stabilizing fiber supply. Now listen, we are also really not forestry people here at Sedgwick, but
I can get you a permit for it though.
But we can get you a permit for it. And we do understand, at broad strokes that really stabilizing the fiber supply is what Kofi and others have been asking for years.
Yeah, and again, not to profess to be an expert here, but putting those companies in the room with their Indigenous partners, because part of this is competition for fiber with Indigenous partners. It's a government trying to address to fix a problem where a lot of Indigenous communities have been excluded from this industry for so long, and the trees are right next to their communities. So this is this is the reallocation of fiber supply. Well, in some respects, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul. Maybe rightly so because of historical grievances, but what's better is to put them all in a room and say, you've got the supply, First Nation. I want that to remain domestic. How can you work with this mill or this value-added element of the forest industry to make sure you both survive? That's a pretty simplistic answer, but it was something suggested to us and sounds like a good idea to me.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of mills close in the past couple of years, which has been really sad because they really are one of the bigger employers in a lot of remote and rural communities, just like mining, just like oil and gas. And it's been hard to see that happen. And we understand that with potentially some policy tweaks, this industry could come back and could even thrive in BC. We do have, a very large
we got trees.
And we got a lot of trees. And there's lots of new ways that foresters are working to ensure, regrowth of forests. So, and there's a lot of First Nations companies that own, or a lot of First Nations, that own forestry companies. So I think there's a real conversation to be had there. Okay, number 10.
Okay.
So set the example for Canada through unilaterally ending interprovincial trade barriers with Alberta and Saskatchewan. So you want us to kick things off?
So to be fair, the Albertans did something like this some time ago, several years ago. But the example is New Zealand. In about 1999, New Zealand's a small trading nation. They do a lot of agriculture. Everybody knows where New Zealand is. They essentially removed all their import tariffs in about 1999. And so 95% of them were gone. And the economy grew. It didn't stop the economy. It didn't harm the economy. They unilaterally, other people were still putting tariffs on their products that they were exporting, but by removing them, there was actual growth. Why don't we just, instead of everybody saying, well, why don't you fix it? And, everybody complains about it, but nobody does anything about it, right? How much jurisdiction the feds have versus the province. I mean, agricultural products belong to the provinces, but when they cross the border, it's federal jurisdiction, a million reasons not to do something. All the reasons I can't. Let's stop saying can't. Can. BC should just say, we're done. No, we have no more tariffs, interprovincial trade barriers. If you've got an accreditation to be an engineer in Manitoba or a doctor in Alberta, or you've got wine from Niagara, I don't care. Bring it. Mm-hmm. We're opening up, and we're going to challenge our neighbors next door because they claim to be free traders, the Albertans and the Saskatchewan folk, to do the same. And the Albertans have done a lot of this already, to be fair. Put the pressure on the rest of the country. Maybe not all the provinces will come along, but the smart ones will. Mm-hmm. Be bold.
Well, you think about how the EU works, right? I mean, this is a very similar model. So obviously you saw the UK pull out of that. However, it works in the EU, and their trade policy works for that reason, right? And they are able to move goods and to have competitive goods and to, have more people like the Americans.
Stop complaining, though. I mean, it's like everybody's like this. It's been argued that the removal of interprovincial trade barriers would make up for the difference of the harm of tariffs. Like it's almost an equivalent impact on the economy. Now, I haven't seen the analysis, so that's just anecdotal. But if this is true, take a bold initiative. So I challenge the government of British Columbia to, put your money where your mouth is and just drop all trade barriers. Let it all come. Challenge the rest of the country to get their act together. And if X province, if Quebec or New Brunswick doesn't want to play, well, that's their consumers that'll suffer. Our consumers will not be harmed by this. Some oxes will be gored. Some industries will be harmed. Mm-hmm. And they will send their lobbyists to Victoria to rail against this. But let's think big and think bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, compromise, right? We're in a time and a place in our country where we can't make everyone happy all the time, which I believe is kind of where public sentiment goes.
Not very good at making everybody happy.
Okay, we're moving on to the third part of today's podcast, which is
really bold ideas.
Which is maybe not. So the reason these didn't get on our top 10 list and these were ideas put forward is because
she wouldn't let me put them on.
Because they weren't project ideas. We really tried to keep our list to 10 projects. The Alberta, Saskatchewan one, BC interprovincial trade barriers. It made it on there because we think it's smart thinking. But we have 5 other quote unquote ideas that we want to put forward that are not specifically project related, but they're interesting and we think are the actions that the provincial government and the federal government in some cases should be taking to, start to diversify our trade. So the first one is the idea of a Mexican trade summit / conversation.
Well, I think we made a big mistake coming into this when everybody was fearing these tariffs before Christmas, that we kind of threw the Mexicans under the bus. Oh, because Americans were saying, the Mexicans are bringing in Chinese product and sort of getting in the back door of NAFTA or USMCA or whatever we're calling it these days. And we kind of threw them under the bus. I think it was a mistake. Again, we should be looking at our other trading partners. In North America, that other trading partner is Mexico. I think the first thing the Prime Minister probably should have done when this all shook down was gotten a plane and gone to Mexico City and talked to her and put a united front on this and say, again, to the Americans, you can do what you want and you're bigger than us and you can probably do it to us and we probably can't harm you, but it doesn't mean we're not going to do our best to live well and we're going to trade with our partners and we're going to strengthen this relationship. Maybe we don't do a lot of trade with Mexico directly. Maybe America in between us means this is not a big economic impact, but it sends the right message, right? That, we believe in the North American Free Trade Agreement. We believe in working as a unit. We believe in you, America, and we believe in the Mexicans. And even if you don't, and we're gonna be friends with our friends. And us, by almost throwing them under the bus, like people say, why do the Americans be so mean to us? Well, we almost did it to the Mexicans.
Yeah, we weren't nice to the Mexicans. We vacation there, but we're not very nice to them. Well, and I like at the end of this idea put forward by the one and only Byng Giraud, who speaks pretty good Spanish, is we should invite Cuba to this meeting. Okay. Can you touch on why?
Okay, this is getting really controversial. If you want to have somebody's hair light on fire like Rubio's or whatever, convene the Organization of the American States or, all the Central American and North American countries other than the Americans and invite Cuba. See what happens.
See what happens. If someone wants us to organize this trade mission for Canada, Mexico, and Cuba, please call us. We'd be happy to do that.
It would get attention.
It would get international attention.
Right?
Yeah.
We were dealing with a guy who, runs public policy through X or Twitter or the heck it is.
He's got his own.
Oh yeah, Social Truth or Truth Social, whatever it is. I'm not good at either of those things. But yeah, let's have a trade summit and invite the Cubans.
Yeah, let's do it. Maybe we'll do it in Cuba. Anyways, so number 2, Byng, is I think something, and we've talked about this, that is really important, which is encouraging private sector-led trade missions. So let's talk about how trade missions go right now. So we have gotten in the habit as a country and a province. Well, our province actually used to have 17 trade offices globally. So British Columbia had those offices. We no longer have any trade offices globally, which is a problem because when things like this happen, we don't have those established relationships. Sure, from what I understand, we help support the federal trade offices globally. However, we don't have a BC first attitude at those offices. I think we need to get out of the habit of letting government lead these trade missions, right? Right now, what happens is a minister, so you'll have Minister Wilkinson say, I'm going to Japan. And then he'll pick a group of people to go with him. I'm not sure how that selection process happens.
Or
Oftentimes, or a lot of times I think it's like the head of different nonprofits or trade associations or whatever. And I'm not, I think they're great. I think doing those trade missions is awesome.
It's good for relationships, yeah.
It's great for relationships. Like, we're an international player and people really appreciate Canada. However, I think the private sector needs to get organized and needs to start leading some of these trade missions that aren't necessarily focused on relationship building. I think we already have a lot of relationships.
Or announcements and press releases.
Yeah, we need to start cutting deals. Like, we need to round up, people that work in the energy sector and go to Taiwan and go to Japan and go to Korea and start to actually, create these agreements between ourselves. Like, I don't think we need to be relying on government for this.
Well, and again, we're trying to come up with ideas that aren't a burden to the public purse. Why can't these trade missions be led by business associations, by businesses, supported obviously by our embassies and consulates? The banks are some of the biggest companies in BC, or Canada rather. Why don't they lead these trade missions? Mm-hmm. Like, we need to start thinking about what's our contribution. If there was a trade mission on critical minerals, our company, we would not expect the province to pay our way to go to Tokyo or to Seoul to talk about critical minerals. We would go, and we would want to be part of those conversations and talk to them about what opportunities there are. I think we need to think about trade missions, again, the Team Canada approach, but maybe private sector led. Because as it is now, it's either government-led and it's really dictated by press releases and sort of announceables, which are important, or it's private sector going individually, not going as a collective. And we're not looked that way. I mean, I think when Japan considers Canada or Korea considers Canada, they don't think of BC or Saskatchewan. They may if they're quite knowledgeable, but they think of Canada. So there's probably something innovative that could be done here. And my challenge would be to the private sector, maybe the trade associations, the business associations, that they should lead them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And make them more business focused, like you said. So another idea that I think is really, quite creative is it's kind of the reverse engineering of what you talked about before. So before you said, let's get all 17 operating mines, have them bring their First Nations partners, weed out the adults and the children, and, figure out how we can help move forward some of those projects that are, in partnership with First Nations. On the inverse, we should actually invite First Nations down that we know have energy projects in their backyard or are working on them. And, maybe even just invite them to come. Do you have a mine? Do you have an energy project that you're working on or working in partnership with? Come talk to us about it and we can maybe help move that forward.
Yeah, one of the criticisms of the Premier's list was it didn't include First Nations. Like, it didn't talk to them because all these projects need in First Nations input and consultation. And that would be applied to any list across the country, right? So regardless of what province. Well, how about turning it on its head? Because I think that one of the challenges the government has is they're typically dealing with the umbrella organizations. And the umbrella organizations like the AFN and those things are important because they speak to the broader challenges First Nations are facing, rights and title, UNDRIP, and those kinds of things. But they're not going to be aware of every little project in every nation's territory. They're just not, right? Mm-hmm. That's not their job. So we have 200 plus nations in BC. This would be easier in other provinces, so I think everybody should consider this. Write a letter, Premier writes a letter to all nations. Do you have a project, private sector project? Again, I'm trying to save some taxpayer money here. So we're not talking about, perhaps, even though they're important, not a medical facility, not a sewage treatment plant, not a water plant. Those things are all important. Government should be dealing with those anyway, but that belongs in a different box. Do you have a private sector project in your territory which you endorse that you would like to see accelerated? Write me back, tell me what it is, and we'll get together. I'll send somebody and we'll accelerate that project. You would probably get a couple dozen or more. I mean, 200 nations. Some of them are, urban and that sort of thing, but you'd get a list of projects. You would get a list of projects. You could say, these are projects First Nations want. They're private sector led, so it's not a burden on the public purse. These are the projects we should perhaps be pursuing. turn it all on its head. Bring me the ideas. Like, this is our list. This is Byng and Allie's list, or whoever we talked to last. And then it's the Premier's list with his cabinet. Well, there are other lists. What's the First Nations list? Like, let's put a challenge to First Nations, because we know a lot of these First Nations are strong business leaders. They've got things going on in their territory. Bring it on.
Yep, absolutely. Let's do it. Last spring, the BC government, last budget, the government of BC announced their version of an Indigenous loan guarantee program. It's called the BC Indigenous Financing Framework, something similar to that. And we haven't heard anything about it since. And when we're talking about the importance of First Nations partnerships, what you just spoke about and have spoke about a lot on this podcast, this loan guarantee program would definitely help speed up some of these projects.
Well, this list, again, from the Premier, the government's list, how could that help accelerate these projects if First Nations could take bigger equity positions, if they choose, it's up to them, in those projects, and all the other things we talked about. Like, that's just another way. We talked about deregulation, we talked about foreign investment, we talked about making things accessible. Well, another element of that is First Nations economic participation. Well, get the program stood up, get it going, get it involved in our priority projects.
Yeah, and of course it doesn't mean consent, right? So there's a delineation between the two. First Nation can take equity in a project and actually still technically oppose the project through the environmental assessment process. However, if a nation is taking equity in a project, usually there's going to be a working relationship between the project proponent and the First Nation, and
You're
they're
going to align
usually
interests.
going to align interests. So that needs to be stood up.
That's the whole point of it. You're supposed to align interests. Well, if we're in a hurry to align interests,
let's stand this thing
let's get
up.
the program
yeah,
going.
And the federal government announced theirs shortly before.
Yeah, it was their budget last year.
It was their budget last year, and then it was more formally announced by Chrystia Freeland last year in Toronto at an event. And they've stood it up. The intake.
Yeah, I mean, it's got growing
process,
pains, but you know what?
But the process
I'll take
is
whatever
open.
you can get.
We know the parameters of the program. There's a website where you can read about it. So we really need the BC government to get on board with this.
Yeah.
Okay, number 5. The federal government has established their program. We're at a critical time. We really need the BC government to get their stuff together, stand up this program, and make it a priority.
And other provinces who don't have it should probably do it as well.
Yeah.
Right. Alberta's got it, Saskatchewan's got it, and Ontario's got it. Feds are working on it. BC's supposed to be working on it.
We flirted with it.
But, this is, again, if one of the primary reasons we can't move projects forward is because we're not doing effective Indigenous consultation, we have to align Indigenous interests with project interests. And one of the ways to align it is to make sure they're included and not left aside, which has been their complaint from the beginning. They watch the trucks go by, they're getting no economic benefit. Let's make the economic benefit real. Take at least that reason away, so we're actually just focused on environmental issues through the regulatory process.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Number 5. This is our last point. I have nothing to do with this. This is a Byng idea through and through. So Byng, you said number 5 is that we should, quote, meet European military officials about a military base in Canada's north that does not include the Americans, something perhaps near Greenland. Open it to the French and British militaries in particular. If you want to be really controversial, float such an idea with the Chinese. That will get attention.
Okay. Tongue firmly in cheek, right? Like tongue firmly in cheek, particularly the last bit. But you know what? If people are saying, we're not defending the North, Canada isn't doing its 2%, Trump is saying he wants to buy Greenland, the Danes and the Greenlanders or Greenlandians or whatever they are obviously up in arms about this. Why don't we all go in on let's build a Arctic military base in between Canada and Greenland, on the Canada coast. We don't have big military. Let's get the French and the British over, and they can anchor their submarines there or their aircraft carriers, whatever it is they have, and let's build that base. Then the Americans can't say we're not taking care of our own. It would go towards our 2%. It sort of pushes back on the whole Greenland and sovereignty thing. And, why not?
I feel like I need to call like a geopolitical professor or something at UBC and run this past them.
No, if you got a Chinese design firm to put it together, might see somebody in the United States top of their head blow off. But, that's just being tongue in cheek. The reality is, how we looked at our allies as a method to deal with our 2% spend. And, strength is as strength does. So why not? Let's have a military base with the Danes and the Brits and the French up by Greenland.
Let's build it. Let's get up to the Arctic. Agreed. And I mean, we've long needed to reestablish our presence in the Arctic. This is something certainly the federal conservatives talk a lot about. We see Bob Zimmer up there quite often.
It's a critical mineral strategy. It's a military strategy. It's a geopolitical issue. It's a trade strategy, and it's an energy security strategy.
It is an energy security strategy. Okay, well, with that, Byng, I think, if I can summarize this whole session down to a celebrity, I would have to choose Lindsay Lohan. Because as someone in their 30s, she was the it girl when I was a kid and a teenager. She kind of fell off the map, like BC. She fell into some hard times. She disappeared for a while, but she's coming back. And I believe BC can come back. I mean, she's gone. She's done some, she's put herself back out there. She's starring in some Hallmark movies. So maybe not like the best movies, but like I believe in a good comeback story. And I think that BC.
She's diversifying.
She's diversifying her trade. I think if she can do it, we can do it.
And, we'll call it the Lindsay Lohan military base in Canada's north.
Yeah, exactly.
The Lohan base. Base Lohan.
Someone take one of our ideas. I mean, they're pretty good. Anyways, thank you so much to our audience for listening to this episode of Primary Risk. I hope you got some inspiration and some ideas. Maybe you got excited about some of these and also maybe had some laughs. Please follow us to receive notifications on upcoming episodes wherever you might get your podcast. Check out the show notes for references to our materials. We'll definitely be posting our top 10 list there. And new episodes will be released bi-monthly. So we have 2 episodes per month. We're excited to have another podcast guest back in a couple weeks. So be sure to follow us on LinkedIn to get news, updates, and listen for announcements. Until the next episode, thanks, Byng.
Thank you.